There's been a lot of talk about wars and drafts that will force men to prosecute them. First, we'll cover the tenets of just war theory. Second, we'll look at how they apply to wars today and war's relationship with collateral damage. And third, we'll look at some objections to just war theory coming off Reddit's Israel page. Now, just before we start, I wanted to give a thought. When 1,250 innocent Israelis died, the response was to let 35,000 Palestinians die. After one controls for the population, that's as if 175,000 people died, or a ratio of 140 to 1. If the Islamic world were to get so-called justice for the 35,000 innocents dead, then that would equal about 5 million, and so on. There's no Catholic order here, just sins which cry out to heaven for vengeance. In Genesis 4 reads, "The Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth out to me from the ground." This is why Jesus says, "The works of the world are evil." This is why he had to come to implore us to a higher form of wisdom. Instead of utilitarianism, he says, "Go and be perfect, sin no more." Jesus stood and cried, saying, "If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, from him shall flow rivers of living water." They looked at each other and said, "Never has a man spoke this way." Like and subscribe to learn more Catholic wisdom in the future. If you watch the whole video, comment whether you think these wars are just and what you'll do if there's a draft. Now, the object of this video is to learn what just war is. So to start, let us first state the contradiction between war and morality. The Catechism says, by recalling the command, "Thou shalt not kill," our Lord asked us for peace of heart and denounced murderous anger and hatred as immoral. God forbids murder. The book of Exodus states, "The innocent and the just you shall not put to death." The fifth commandment forbids direct and intentional killing as gravely sinful. The murderer and those who cooperate voluntarily in murder commit a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance, which refers to the fratricidal killing of Cain and Abel. Lastly, the Catechism says infanticide, fratricide, parricide, and the murder of a spouse are especially grave crimes because they break a natural bond. So here we see the idea of natural law brought in, and we know that God is our first principle, who is the sovereign good, and that he created nature. All nature and all good things emanate from him, while evil destroys the good forms coming from God, like the human body, health, and beauty. And we know not to kill by natural inclination, that each man has a natural instinct to preserve his life. We also know by nature that we ought to defend ourselves due to the instinct we have to preserve life. So the Catechism says, the act of self-defense can have a double effect, the preservation of one's own life and the killing of the aggressor. The one is intended and the other is not. So the law double effect allows us to preserve our own lives when they come under threat, since when it comes down to it, the choice is primarily to save your own life. And the Catechism states that the defense of the common good requires that an unjust aggressor be rendered unable to cause harm. For this reason, those who legitimately hold authority have the right to use arms to repel aggressors against the civil community entrusted to their responsibility. The Church and human reason both assert the permanent validity of the moral law during armed conflict. The mere fact that war has regrettably broken out does not mean everything becomes licit between the warring parties. In summary, here's the contradiction that just war theory seeks to solve. First, it's immoral to kill according to revelation and by reason of natural law. Second, it's sometimes required to systematically kill, namely in war for the defense of the common good of a society. Third, the moral law is still valid and active during an armed conflict. Not everything is licit. Fourth, what does the moral law dictate is licit for a just war? To answer this question, we'll have a look at Augustine's City of God, written in the 5th century concurrent with the fall of Rome, when he tried to defend Christian ethics despite the empire's collapse. One of the first principles of Catholic ethics is, as Augustine says, that we should not endeavor by sin to obviate sin. That is, Catholics and anyone who loves God cannot do evil to prevent a future evil. So Jesus says, "It is impossible but that offenses will come, but woe unto him through whom they come. It would be better that a millstone be hung around his neck and he cast into the sea than that he should offend one of these little children." And Augustine says, "Who is such a fool to say, 'Let us sin now, that we may obviate a possible future sin. Let us now commit murder, lest perhaps after we should commit adultery.' If we're so controlled by evil that innocence is out of the question, and we can at best make a choice between two sins, is not a future and uncertain adultery preferable to a present and certain murder? Is it not better to commit a wickedness which penitence may heal, than a crime which leaves no place for healing contrition? What shall I say of that virtue which is called prudence? Is not all its vigilance spent in discernment of good from evil things, so that no mistake may be admitted about what we should desire to do and what we must avoid? And the Catechism states, there are strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force, which require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. So what are the conditions for moral legitimacy? First, authorities must try to make peace without war. Second, war must be called by the proper authority. Third, the war's cause must be justified. Fourth, the war must have a reasonable chance of success. Fifth, the war must possess right intention, not causing graver evils. On the first point, the Catechism states all other means of putting an end to the injustice or conflict must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. Augustine says, we desire earthly peace for the sake of enjoying the goods of life. We make war in order to attain peace, so that we can enjoy the goods of life. Therefore, war should be a last resort, because breaking the peace destroys all that a good man should desire. Number 2, obviously the war must be declared by the proper authority. St. Thomas Aquinas says the authority of the sovereign state must be given by whose command the war is to be waged, for it is not the business of a private individual to declare war, because he can seek redress from the rights his civil government has given him. And Augustine says, whoever kills a man is implicated in the guilt of murder, but there is an exception for those justified by a just law. They who have waged war in conformity with the law have represented the wisdom of the government, and in his capacity he has put to death wicked men by war. Such persons by no means have violated the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Third, there must be a just cause to wage, by law, a just war. Aquinas says a just cause is required, namely, that the ones who are attacked should be attacked because they deserve it on account of some evil. Thus the Catechism says, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. It isn't obvious if terror attacks justify war, therefore, unless it is certain that attacks will continue. Still, evil demands justice, though justice does not always demand war. Fourth, the war must have serious prospects of success. Augustine explains why when he addresses Cicero, as Cicero said, death is no punishment to the individual, but rather death delivers them from all other punishments. But it is a punishment to the state. This is the attitude of Zelensky in the West, which the Pope has rejected, that we must fight the glorious fight to the death of the very last man, because the death of the soldier is merely a loss to the state. This attitude doesn't value life and is condemned. Augustine asked whether the Saguntines did the right thing when they chose that their whole citizenry should die, rather than that they should exit the Roman Empire. He said, quote, this earthly wisdom is to be utterly rejected, since the city of God, the holy Catholic faith, eternal life, and the life of good virtue can be maintained under losing conditions. In other words, if Ukraine had a small chance of winning, they ought to surrender the state, because they can still live virtuous Catholic lives with the love of the Holy Spirit, even under oppressive rule. In this sense, no hopeless war should be continued to its natural conclusion. Fifth, and finally, the war must possess the right intention, and the Catechism states that the use of arms must not produce evils graver than the evils to be eliminated. Further, the Catechism states the power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. The right intention is to do justice to evil, destroying evil, securing peace in a licit manner. By operating this way, the just army advances the cause of good and honors God instead of doing evil. Augustine says true religion looks upon as peaceful those wars that are waged, not for motives of aggrandizement or cruelty, but with the object of securing peace, of punishing evildoers, and of uplifting the good. For it may happen that the war is declared by a legitimate authority and for a just cause, and yet be rendered unlawful through a wicked intention. Hence Augustine says, the passion for inflicting harm, the cruel thirst for vengeance, a relentless spirit, the fervor of revolt, and the lust for power, all these are rightly condemned in war. So what about collateral damage? The Catechism states that the legitimate defense of persons and societies is not an exception to the prohibition against killing and murdering innocents. This means that we cannot knowingly kill innocents according to the fifth commandment and the dictates of natural law. But can we kill innocents indirectly if they're not the primary target? The fifth commandment forbids doing anything with the intention of indirectly bringing about an innocent person's death. This is because knowingly acting as the remote cause of killing an innocent still requires conscious decision to kill. Though you are not the proximate cause, it is still an offense to God. Here's a simple but absurd example. Killing a baby is a sin, but if you want to kill Hitler behind the baby, you must kill the baby intentionally. In this case, the intellect grasps that it will have to intentionally kill an innocent person. As a result, he must find another way, and if every way is blocked, then he will not kill the person that way. A utilitarian model of ethics would weigh the two evils and decide if one is more valuable than it is okay to do. If all operated on this principle, then morality would become relative, and over time anything could be justified, as Chesterton says in Orthodoxy. This situation would not fit the definition of collateral damage because the killing of the infant was not accidental by any means, nor would it be covered by double effect because the killing of the infant was more immediate. How then can innocents die? The Catechism says unintentional killing is not morally imputable, so innocents can die only by accidents, but the accident cannot be caused by willful ignorance. The concept of collateral damage has been twisted into a definition that labels any dead innocent as collateral. Yet collateral damage does not include knowing indirect killings, willful accidents, or willed killings of civilians given a certain threshold of value is hit. Here's a true instance of collateral damage. A sniper kills a combatant on the roof, and it is assumed he'll fall dead, but instead he stumbles, falls off the roof, bounces off the siding, only to fall and kill a baby. The death of the innocent cannot reasonably be foreseen, and this is a true accident. Instead, you see collateral damage wrongly attributed. First, that it's okay to kill some innocents as long as there's a good profit from it. This is utilitarian, and it descends into madness. Second, willful accidents, especially where the intentions are dubious. The Catechism reads that the moral law prohibits exposing someone to mortal danger without grave reason. For instance, deciding to attack an insurgent in a refugee camp instead of somewhere else. Third, knowing indirect killings. For instance, leaving a territory and deciding you won't bother to detonate any of the landmines. Dropping bombs on innocents is by far the most commonly seen, and so the viewer will ask, well, isn't this covered by the law of double effect? Now, the law of double effect allows us to expose an innocent to mortal danger in exceptional but grave circumstances if, first, the action taken has a primary good outcome. Second, the evil side effect cannot be desired. Third, the good must at least be equally as immediate as the evil. And fourth, there must be no other way you can pursue the good. If you drop a bomb and you know everything within 50 meters dies, and next to the enemy commander is an innocent child, dropping the bomb necessarily means killing a baby. That is not acceptable collateral damage because you're intentionally murdering an innocent, and there's certainly another way to pursue the end. Nothing absolutely forces the bomb to be dropped. Now, why don't we apply this to some of the wars going on today? Keep in mind that this is just an opinion. First, the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia never had a grave, certain, and lasting threat justifying the invasion and millions of deaths that followed. Ukraine justly defended itself in the earliest weeks, but then Ukraine rejected peace dealings in Turkey. By the time the summer offensive lost in 2023, the war stood no chance of winning. So Russia shouldn't have started the war, but if it did, Ukraine should have tried to negotiate peace, making concessions. Failing that, then peace should have been sought after the failed offensive, and failing that, peace should be sought in the meetings in June of 2024. Addressing Israel and Palestine. In the case of Palestine, the warring of Hamas did not carry good intention, as innocents were primary targets, and therefore the action was not in accord with just war theory. In the case of Israel, the war's intent has been dubious from the start and has created far greater evils. And there were other ways to pursue Hamas, which would have caused fewer deaths. That said, some reparation was required for the terror attack to preserve justice and to gain back the hostages. So ideally, Palestine wouldn't have attacked, and if it did, then Israel would have made its intent clear and wouldn't have caused greater evils, killing many more innocent people. Onto the case of China and Taiwan. China doesn't have a just cause because there's no grave harm being done to China by the current state of affairs in Taiwan, and any war would cause far greater evils and mass civilian deaths. Taiwan has a good case for a just war. If one were to say that Taiwan's fight isn't just, it could be because they haven't done much to engender peace along the way, especially where it's reasonable to do so. One deciding factor will be if Taiwan targets civilians in China. For instance, if they attack the Three Gorge Dam, this could indirectly lead to the death of millions in China. If such an attack was taken, the war would become unjust quickly. So basically, no war today is just. Perhaps just one of the 6 war efforts could be. And one can see that the requirement for just war is high, so if these conditions were always respected, we would have an extremely peaceful world. Here are some objections that I read off Reddit. I'm just going to paraphrase them. People say, what about carpet bombing, the nukes of Japan, the destroying of Dresden in Syria, and will try to equivocate their war with what America has done. And the Catechism says, every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a heinous crime against God. Here's some objections that come off Reddit. I'm just going to paraphrase them. People say, what about carpet bombing, the nukes in Japan, the bombing of Dresden and of Syria? And they'll try to equivocate their army's actions with what America's done because America is always the good guys. But the Catechism says, every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a heinous crime against God. Therefore, when it comes to the example of Japan and America, then America should have been willing to make peace also on Japan's term, or they should have ended the war, or simply continue it on foot. Another retort is that wouldn't just war cause more self-damage? If doing the right thing causes evil to the nation or the self, then God has predestined for that evil to occur and will bring some greater good for it. Augustine addresses this by saying, God can be present unperceived when he exposes us to adversity. It is either to prove our perfections or to correct our imperfections. And in return for our patient endurance of suffering, he reserves for us an everlasting reward. In this way, a soldier will keep his hope and repose in righteous action. And so someone will ask about sieges and the Catholic kings of the Middle Ages that used them. The Catechism says the acceptance by human society of murderous famines without efforts to remedy them is a scandalous injustice and a grave offense. However, many of the sieges of the Middle Ages were used to weaken the enemy, not to outright genocide them, whereas the Holodomor was an example of a grave offense. So today, somebody will retort that those are good arguments for just war, but they're just not realistic anymore. It's true that modern warfare makes just war much harder, which is why it should be engaged in less, as the Catechism says, modern weaponry makes consequences of war far greater and thus should be prudentially discerned with greater caution. Long gone are the days of Austerlitz and Waterloo, with their collective 100,000 dead and practically zero civilian deaths. Another objection is that certain enemies are always using human shields to defend military equipment. Then the solution isn't just to kill all the innocent people, but to find another way to deal with the enemy. The final sentiment I hear pretty often is that war is war, nothing else needs to be said, all the death is sad but necessary, mistakes and atrocities happen no matter what, it's all inevitable. The deaths in Palestine are at the hands of Hamas. In a certain sense, it's true that Hamas started the war on October 7th, but the remote cause isn't the number one priority to think about, because you could just prosecute remote causes back to the very start. Instead, the proximate cause of a moral injustice is the most important, and the proximate cause of an innocent dying by a bomb is the one who drops the bomb. Hence, Jesus said, "Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh." Like and subscribe for more.